Please be seated. Father Bedford would like to get started.
We're not letting you, Father. We're not letting you.
This is a most fascinating story that Father Bedford has to tell about a 9-year-old boy being in London during the Blitz, 1940. So anyway, please take your seats and we'll get started. You're going to be fascinated.
No, they're going to be fascinating.
You're going to be.
More chairs. Big chairs.
You're going to be fascinated. And so here he is, the incomparable Father Michael Bedford.
I'm sorry, I lost my voice. I won't be able to do it.
No, it's not to turn the lights off back here.
They're up there. That's right.
That's all of them. There you go.
No, one more. Dial. The dial's up there.
I just want to say the word blitz has been used a lot in talking about this talk. I'm sure everybody here knows that the word blitz is half of a German word, blitzkrieg, lightning war. And London wasn't the only city that was blitzed, I believe. Many cities in England were blitzed. But I'm only going to be talking a little bit about London. I was only there for a short part of the Blitz, but I'll explain all that as we go along, I hope. Put the mic up to your mouth. Put the mic up to my mouth, put the mic up to my mouth. Because the next person who uses it's going to get my cold germs. Lucky them. Would you put the first slide up?
I'll try.
This was taken at the school I was attending just before we went to England. It was a little one-room country school. And just remember that when we get later on and talk about the English school I went to.
Where is this?
This is taken South Bay, New York, central New York. And that's my brother Malcolm. And
Which one are you?
Yeah, which one are you?
I'm the good-looking one. Who asked that? I'm the handsome one on the right.
The one without the bike. The one without the bike.
Yes, yeah, well, that was his new bike. He had to get that in the pictures. Yeah. So people say, well, how did a little boy from upstate New York wind up in the Blitz? And I'll try to answer that for you. But to do that, we got to go back to some beginnings. Best place to start is with my father. Sanders Shaw Bedford was born in the Midlands in England, up near Peterborough. He emigrated to Canada, and when World War I started, they started recruiting for the Canadian Army. He joined up and was sent to England, then into France, then into the trenches, and he was wounded once, and when they fixed him up in France and sent him back into the trenches again. And the second time he was wounded, they had to send him to England to recuperate. And he was eventually sent to an army camp near Folkestone in Kent, which is a southeastern part of England. And so he was assigned to light guard duties while he was there. Next picture. Isn't exactly Downton Abbey, is it?
Pretty close.
Every day this pretty girl would ride by on her bicycle. And being a healthy young Canadian boy, as he claimed, he wanted to meet her. Well, he was very enterprising. Now, remember, he was from the Midlands of England originally. He'd only been in Canada a couple of years, but he claimed a Canadian citizenship. So he picked a bunch of wildflowers, and when she came by the next time, he said, "Excuse me, miss, I'm from Canada. Would you tell me the names of these wildflowers, please?" There's an opening for some of you guys who might be looking. Yeah. And of course, one thing led to another, and he gets invited home for a chicken dinner, and this young girl, Muriel Hope Knight, eventually became my mother. Next picture, please. This is my mother. That's her passport photo when she went to Canada. Next picture, please. As usually happens, they got married. And so my mother followed him to Canada when the army sent him back, and they were married in Cornwall, Ontario. Next picture. As then happens after marriage, sometimes before, but in those days it was after, they had 3 sons. The 3 older ones were my Canadian brothers. Then they moved over into America. They became naturalized American citizens. I was born in upstate New York. I'm a natural-born American citizen, not like that guy Cruz, who was born in Canada. No, sorry, didn't mean to bring politics into it. Anyway, my 3 brothers and my parents became naturalized American citizens. Then my parents were both English-born. My mother was born in London and lived down there in the southeast, and my father was born in Peterborough. Both wound up in Canada. And they decided that they wanted to go back home in 1938. Well, those of you who know anything about history know that in 1938 the situation in Europe was terrible. Why on earth they decided to go back, they have never been able to explain to us satisfactorily. But anyway, mother, father, and us 4 boys got on the, next picture please, on the RMS Franconia, an English Cunard liner. And we went back to England and arrived in Southampton on November the 7th, 1938. We 4 boys managed to terrorize that liner. We were everywhere, but when they wanted us, we were nowhere. Next picture. This is what the four of us looked like. That's our passport photo going to England. My brother Malcolm on the left, and the tall guy is my brother Barney. We called him B. And the fellow on the right is my brother William, the oldest of the bunch, and of course, as you would expect, the good-looking one in the front there, the sweet, cherubic-looking one, is with a bow tie. That's me, yes. Okay. When we got to England, we stayed in the same house where my mother had been living when she met my father, and we stayed there for a while we got things sorted out. The oldest brother, the one on the right, he had just graduated from high school here in the States, and he was very unhappy about suddenly being turfed out of his normal environment and being suddenly dragged off to England. So he went to my father and petitioned my father for a return ticket to the States, and he was back in the States before Christmas. Too bad. Anyway, my parents purchased the property next door to where we were living. Next picture. This is where we were living. This is a farmhouse, 400 years old, and at night it had all kinds of funny noises in it, and it even had a secret room. It had been, according to legend, it had been a smuggler's location, and but it was a good, sturdy, old 400-year-old house. Now that was my aunt's house, actually. Our house was up the top of the hill there, much more modern. But my parents bought 8 acres of land, and we settled into the English countryside, hopefully to settle down and become a part of the local population. Next picture, please. Well, my parents put me into a school. It's a Harvey Grammar School for boys, private school. It was an old school. As you can see, it was founded in 1674. It was founded by the Harvey family. If any doctors here might recognize the name William Harvey, who did a lot of work with the circulation of blood and the operation of the heart. And they put up the money to start the school back in 1674. And the central shield is the Harvey family shield. And for my school, they added on, at the top there it says Téméraire, and then at the bottom it says Redoutable and Fougueux. The Téméraire was the second ship of the line at the Battle of Trafalgar, and it was captained by Captain Harvey. Who else? And he captured 2 French battleships, the Redoutable and the Fougueux. So that's the history of my school. Now remember, next picture please. Remember I said I was from upstate New York and attended a 1-room schoolhouse. All of a sudden, here I am in this kind of an environment. This school, we had about 600 boys. In my school at where we came from in New York, if we had 30, it was a lot. But anyway, I suddenly had to fit into this. We wore, it was a very formal school. We all wore school uniforms. There were no girls, of course. Girls, ooh. All of our instructors were called masters, and they were male. And most of them wore academic gowns, and it was a rather strict environment. We began each day, would you believe, with a service of morning prayer with hymns. Next picture, please. These are my 2 favorite masters from the school. The gentleman on the left, Mr. Howarth, taught me to read properly. And the man on the right struggled vainly to teach me to speak French. There's Mr. Emerson. He was a wonderful, tremendous sense of humor. Mr. Howarth on the right was also deputy headmaster and was a no-nonsense man, but the boys respected him tremendously. They never tried to rank him at all or anything. He was always well respected. Emerson was always well respected also. Next picture, please.
Little cute guy.
Guess who? There I am in all my school uniform with my school tie, and notice my pen clipped in my pocket, you know, like the nerds do today. Well, we didn't know the word nerd in those days. We thought you'd left the letter off. Anyway, I had to transition from American schoolboy to British schoolboy in short order. I had to acquire a new language. Trucks were not trucks, they were lorries. Cars were not cars, they were motors, and so on and so forth, and to learn a whole bunch of new words like, oh, crikey, oh, blimey. You had to melt in with the rest of my schoolmates. One of the masters said, you talk like an Aborigine and you write like a Hottentot. They didn't spare the compliments. I had to learn a new monetary system, pounds, shillings, and pence. 4 farthings to the penny, 12 pennies to the shilling, 20 shillings to the pound, 21 shillings to the guinea. And you had to be able to multiply that by 6.25. Now, it took me a little while to figure that out. What happened was, because my classmates had all come out of English primary schools, they were familiar with all of that stuff. So I was tutored one summer by one of the masters so that I could pick up on a lot of this stuff. And they had a scholarship exam. If you won the scholarship, you got your next, I think, 10 years of schooling free, which was considerable. So anyway, about 40 boys sat, 10 of us passed. So I saved my parents a lot of money by being such a bloody smart little tyke. Things seemed to be going along quite well. We'd established a routine. I was going to school, and my father had found work, and my mother was keeping the house, and so on and so forth. But then the clouds of war were getting thick, and there were a lot of signs that war was coming. Next picture, please. One day, 2 of my cousins had come down from London, lady cousins. The tall brother on the right, on the left there is B, as we called him, then Malcolm on the right, and I'm the sweet one in the middle. Gladys was the girl on the left, and Doris is the girl on the right. They were visiting us from London. Oh, by the way, Doris is still alive. I call her about every 3 or 4 weeks. She lives in a nursing home in Eastbourne, and she's 92, I think she said the last time, 93, something like that, and sharp as a tack. But anyway, in spite of Mr. Chamberlain's sincere efforts, war broke out, and my 2 cousins happened to be visiting us. This picture was actually taken on September the 3rd, the day, 1939, the day that war was declared. So they went back to London, and we tried to settle down to some kind of a routine. Next picture, please. We were all issued national identity cards. Everybody was supposed to carry this around with you. If you were challenged by a policeman or a member of the armed forces, you should be able to produce that and identify yourself, told where you were living and so forth, and what you were up to. Turn to the next picture, please. But our family were considered to be aliens. We were not British subjects, we were Americans. We had to have special identity cards, certificate of registration, and mine, and ours had to have pictures in, so that, again, if you were challenged, you had to be able to produce this and identify yourself. My father had to report every day to the local constable to assure him that we aliens were where we were supposed to be. We hadn't wandered off to try to sabotage something. We were there where we were supposed to be. And it was, at one point, it was actually decreed that all aliens had to leave the coastal area. Well, we lived only 2 or 3 miles inland from the coast. That meant my family had to leave. They were given 24 hours to pack up and leave. So they had to abandon our property, our house, and they moved up to London. My father had a sister there, so they went to live with her until they could sort things out. It was kind of a rush to do. Okay, meanwhile, next picture, please. Lots of preparations have been going on. There had been first aid training given, classes have given. we were all issued gas masks. If you look at this picture closely, you'll see that people are either wearing gas masks or putting them on. And they use smoke bombs to simulate poison gas. When they would have a test every so often, you never knew when it was going to happen. They'd just suddenly throw a couple of smoke bombs out, and you better put your gas mask on. You better have it with you and put it on. It was a nuisance. Everywhere you went, you had to have that blessed box with you. Anyway, there were a lot of preparations that had been made in advance. There had been some underground air raid shelters built even before war was declared. But air raid wardens had been training, and the blackout was put into operation. The blackout meant, that was January the 1st, 1939. Blackout meant that all lights had to be covered up, windows had to be covered over, headlights on cars were shaded, and you just didn't go allow any light. If you did, one of the air raid wardens would yell, "Put that bloody light out!" So that was the most frequent thing we heard. But gradually things were getting more and more warlike, shall I say. As a matter of interest, it's been proven that more people were injured by the blackout than were injured by enemy action during the first week. Both cars would run into each other, people would stumble and fall, and so forth. But anyway, eventually people got used to it. Paper strips were glued across the window in advance of explosions, blasting flying glass all over the place, and so on. Plans have been made to evacuate about 3 million people from the large metropolitan area. And when war was first declared, actually an evacuation order was put in to play, and a 1 million people left London, moved down into the area where we lived, because they thought that the Germans would immediately start bombing, which they didn't do. But the people slowly drifted back home when bombing didn't start. But it had disrupted a lot of lives and made things very uncomfortable. One of the other things that took place was food rationing. Next picture, please. Now you ladies will appreciate this. This was approximately a week's ration for one person. Oh, and notice at the bottom it says eggs, when available 1 per month. Fortunately, we lived in the country and we had lots of eggs. But that was the food ration there. And you had a ration book, and when you went to collect your ration, they'd mark it off in the book that you received your sugar or whatever. And if you went in and they didn't have any sugar, the fact that you had a ration book that said you could get sugar didn't mean you could get it. If they didn't have it, you didn't get it.
Father?
That's,
Where it says meat, it says 1 shilling 2 pence.
yeah, the value of the meat that you could get, that would have been, what? A shilling was 12 pence, that'd be 14 pence. Back in those days, what was a penny worth? I can't remember now, but it wasn't very much.
But that was what it was worth?
Yes, yeah. So different meats have different values.
Right.
So they had to give it to you by value.
Probably about 25
Not by weight,
cents.
by...
Because it's got that 1 pound 3 ounces underneath it.
Yeah, well, average, I guess.
Oh.
Fortunately, I wasn't involved in it. I was eating it when I could get it. But fearing enemy attack, they discouraged large gatherings of people. So at my school, they said only 50 boys were allowed in the school at a time. Well, that disrupted us. We were about 500 boys in the school. So we were working in shifts. That became a nuisance. And then they built underground shelters, air raid shelters, and put up blast walls around the school. And then we could have full participation. We had to practice getting out of the classrooms and into the shelters. we were able to move 500 boys out of the classes into the shelters in 3 minutes. Because you never knew, was this going to be it, or was this another one of those practices, or what? By this time, warning sirens were going off fairly frequently, and our daily life was disrupted. The country, for a while, drifted into a period known as the Phony War. Not much was going on in England, but there was fighting going on the continent, and the British troops were fighting with the French against the Germans on the continent. But at the summer of 1940, the German army broke through and swept through the Low Countries, Belgium and Holland, and English suffered its worst defeat by the defeat at Dunkirk. If any of you are history buffs, you know that the Germans pushed the British and French army up against the Channel, and they had to send boats over from places like Folkestone and Dover to get the troops off and bring them back to England. So private yachts, sailboats, motorboats were all called into service to go across the Channel. And the Channel is a very funny piece of ocean. It can be very, very stormy. But during the 5 days of the Dunkirk event, the Channel was like a mill pond. And I stood by the harbor and watched the boats come back with the troops on them. Defeated army. Now England's enemy was 21 miles away. The distance from the English coast to the French coast at that point is 21 miles. Imagine for a minute that your enemy has got troops assembled down in Livonia, and you're here in downtown Detroit. That's how far we were from the enemy. But between us, thank goodness, was the English Channel, which had saved England from the Spanish Armada and from Napoleon's army. God bless the English Channel. Going on overhead was what's been called the Battle of Britain. And we could see the fighters and bombers wheeling around back and forth up above us. We'd see them come crashing down, see the pilots floating down in their parachutes, and it got to be pretty sticky, believe me. You didn't dare go out for any length of time. You had to be close to a shelter because you didn't know when you were going to get attacked. So after a while it was decided there was too much disruption and we had to get the school to a safe area. So they evacuated us from Folkestone up into South Wales. And so on May 26th the order was given, and 350 Harvey boys were taken by train from Folkestone to South Wales. Some of the families decided not to go. They decided to risk living there. Some of them went to family in other parts of the country where it was safe. We went to a town called Merthyr Tydfil. Anybody recognize that name? Very well-known name. My goodness. It's a little mining town up in the valleys of South Wales. Hardly anybody ever heard of it. I knew absolutely nothing about Wales. The only thing I knew was the Bible story about Jonah. Being swallowed by a whale. I knew that this couldn't be that. But we were received very, very kindly. The Welsh people were just wonderful. All of a sudden they had 350 boys and a couple of hundred girls from the county school put on their doorsteps, and they were told, here, take them in and look after them. Next picture, please. Oh, that's the Battle of Britain monument. That's up on the cliffs between Folkestone and Dover. And I took Mary there, and she sat right there at where these feet are, and I have a picture of her at home sitting there. But it represents the last pilot sitting, waiting for the missing aircraft to come home. Anyway, next picture, please. Now, my schoolmate and I were fortunate. We were billeted with these two ladies. They were sisters, the Mrs. Lewis, Miss Janie on the left, and Miss Cecily on the right. And they were maiden ladies. They'd never had any family of their own, and all of a sudden, here they are. They've got two 11-year-old boys to look after. They were wonderful. Actually, they took us into they were a part of a large family, mainly school teachers. The family seemed to go to school teachers for some reason. But we were fortunate to live there, and I stayed with them for the next 4 years. 4 years I lived with them. And on one of our trips over with Mary, I took her over to meet them, and they were just wonderful. I said, now Mary, these people are Welsh and they have accents. You're going to have to listen carefully when they talk to you. About 15 minutes after they'd been together, the three of them were chattering away as if they'd been friends for life. Yeah. Next picture, please. The Welsh Board of Education very kindly arranged space for our school to occupy part of a castle called Cyfarthfa Castle. That had been originally the home of one of the rich iron and steel barons in South Wales. He made his tremendous fortune off mining and steel foundries and so forth. It was big enough. It had the boys' school in it, the girls' school in it, and the county museum was in the middle to tell you how big it was. Well, eventually we had to break our school into two units, so one unit stayed here and the other went to another school. But things weren't always pleasant between the Welsh boys and the English boys. We did have a few set-tos and a few bloody noses, and finally the authorities decided that we would settle all of this on the soccer field. So afterwards it was Welsh soccer against English soccer and bloody noses in between.
Father,
Yes?
did you stay with these women instead of being with your parents?
Yes, I lived there.
Okay,
Had
where were your parents now?
London. Yeah.
Oh, they stayed in London and you
Yes.
kids left, or just you?
I stayed with the school. The school went to South Wales.
Okay.
My parents had been told by the authorities to get out of your house and go live somewhere else. So they went to London. My dad got to work there. Next picture, please. This is what we looked like, a bunch of English schoolboys with our master, Mr. Ellis. He was a wonderful man. You can see a part head on the left-hand side of a hat sticking up. That was Hans Cohen. He was a German Jew, a refugee. As far as he knew, his father was in a concentration camp in Germany somewhere. He and his mother had escaped. The front left boy here is that handsome one again. God, anyway. The next boy, last I heard of him, he was a banker in Singapore. The next one over, I suspect that was Leopard. I suspect he wound up in jail. He had that air about him. And where there was trouble, there was a leopard. And the last lad behind there became, believe it or not, a Roman Catholic priest. So some good did come out of it. We didn't suffer much from enemy action there where we were in Merthyr Tydfil. We were down in the valleys. There wasn't an awful lot to attract the bombers. There was only some light industry in that area. So we were in pretty good shape, really. The masters really worked hard with us to see that we were entertained. Weekends, they'd take us on rambles around the countryside and that sort of thing. And we descended on this town, and they had a YMCA and a YWCA. Well, the YMCA soon filled up, so they said, some of us go to the YWCA. So I actually had a YWCA card for years. I was a member of the Women's Christian Association. Oh, anyway. Now, as we got there in June and got ourselves sorted out into our billets, as we were called. And as the summer disappeared and Christmas holidays were coming, I wanted to see my family. I wanted to go home for Christmas. They were in London. So I begged and begged to be allowed to go home for Christmas. So at last, my parents agreed, and they sent my railroad fare. At age 11, all alone, I boarded a train in Merthyr, took the train to Cardiff, train out of Cardiff into London, all by myself, age 11. This was December 1940, and London was in the midst of the Blitz. I don't know why my parents agreed to my coming home, but they did. I must have been very persuasive. They were living in the West End of London in an upper two-story flat. And my father was working for the Royal Army Medical Corps as a civilian clerical person. And the building where he worked had a large underground air raid shelter, and so they made sections of that shelter available to the families. So every evening, we would take our pillows and our blankets, and Mother would pack up the family jewels, such as they were, and the valuable papers, and we would all go down into this underground shelter until the all clear sounded the next morning. The raids usually started in the early part of the night and went on till the next morning. Every night, about 40% of the population of London disappeared underground. This picture is taken at the Aldwych underground station, and you can see the people up on the platform trying to get comfortable for the night, and some people were actually down on the tracks sleeping. There were no trains at night, so they didn't have to worry about the electric, the lines being electrified. It was quite safe. So people, either like my family, went into shelters provided, some went into individual shelters in their homes, and some into the underground rail system like these folks here, and to sleep there until the all clear sounded in the morning. While I was home on that Christmas holiday, London suffered its worst attack of the Blitz. On the night of December the 29th, 1940, was called the Second Great Fire of London. The first Great Fire was in 1666, when most of London burned down, but this one is the Second Great Fire. Our family was in our shelter. We could hear and feel the bombing. We could see the red glow of the fires in the East End of London. And this picture, next one, please. This is the iconic picture of the London Blitz. That's St. Paul's Cathedral. Now, the cathedral didn't receive a direct hit. It got a lot of incendiary bombs, but they had worked out a system of fire watchers, men working up on the roof with water buckets and sand and so forth, and as soon as one of the incendiary bombs landed, they would put it out. There was some fire damage did result to the cathedral, but it was amazing. All around it, the area was practically devastated. but the cathedral stood through it all. Two days later, January 1st, I was scheduled to go back to Wales. Christmas holiday was over. Mother and I worked our way through heavily damaged streets, over fire hoses, abandoned vehicles, walking, and then when we could find a bus that was going in the direction we wanted to go, we finally arrived at Paddington Station, where I was supposed to board my train for Wales. We found that the station had been badly damaged and no trains were leaving. We did find out the trains would probably, for Wales, would probably be leaving from King's Cross Station, so again, traveling on foot and by hopping from bus to bus. We got there and I was soon on the train going back to Wales. I didn't want to go, of course. I liked the excitement for one thing, but, well, you know, 12-year-old boy. But I knew that I had to go, so I took my little suitcase, and being a good little boy, I headed back to Wales. I did go back to London one more time during the Blitz. I think it was Easter holiday. They were still having some raiding done then. But pretty soon they lifted the prohibition against my parents as being foreigners, and they were allowed to go back to their house in the country. And so subsequent holidays, instead of having to go into London, I was able to go down into the country to stay with them. Now, my parents had, as I say, they had 8 acres of farmland, and my dad thought, well, I've got all this farmland, I better do something with it. So he had a bunch of chicken houses built, and he had several hundred chickens that he was raising for eggs and for meat. And everything was going fine. The chicken houses were built. They were starting to get eggs and so on and so forth. It looked like it was going to really work out. But one day, a number of German bombers who were supposed to attack the nearby RAF airfield, which was about half a mile from our house, they decided that they were going to bomb the airfield, but they missed. And our 8 acres of land got 8 bombs in the 8 acres. The chicken houses were damaged or destroyed. The chickens, many of them were killed, and those that weren't killed, they went kind of bonkers. My dad said they would be sitting on the ground, they'd get up, take 3 or 4 steps, lean over, and drop dead. So that put the kibosh on the chicken farming. But while this was before they quit, my dad was out there one day trying to repair one of these chicken houses, and Mother called him in and said, "Oh, Sanders, the lunch is ready." So he went in, and they just sat down to lunch when there was a tremendous explosion, and they went out to see the chicken house my dad had just been working on had been blown to bits. There was an unexploded bomb under the chicken house. They didn't know it was there. And unexploded bombs happened a lot. When my parents I said they had to move up to London suddenly. Well, the flat that they moved into, they couldn't stay in the first night because there was an unexploded bomb in the back garden. Then next door, my grandmother's house, one day there was a knock on the door, and I opened the door and there's this big Bobby. "Oh, I'm sorry, madam, but you're going to have to leave your home because there's a unexploded bomb across the street, and the lads are going to come in and dig it out, and we think maybe you better be away from home here in case it goes off." So, my grandmother was a feisty old dear, and she said, "Young man, I was living in this house when the Kaiser sent the Zeppelins over with bombs, and I'm certainly not going to get out for Adolf Hitler." And she didn't, and they dug it out and it didn't explode. there was another funny one. She used to sit in a big overstuffed chair by the fireplace. And one day, one of these flying bombs, I'll come to those shortly, exploded right over the house. And the concussion knocked all the soot down out of the chimney. Years and years of accumulated coal soot came down. My grandmother was black from head to foot. The only thing you could see were her two blue eyes and her lips where she had gone, the soot off. And she sat there, and my aunt took a look at her, burst out laughing. And grandmother says, "Evie, don't stand there laughing. Clean me up." You know, you think about these things, but at the time, it was just normal life. We didn't worry about things like that. It was just, that's the way life was. So, anyway, enough about that nonsense. Back to my story. In June of 1941, Germany invaded Russia, and this took some pressure off the coast, of the English coast. And we still had intermittent raids along the coast. Occasionally they would sneak in and drop a bomb or two, or what was more annoying, they would run up and down the streets, fly up and down the streets, I should say, machine gunning, which wasn't very healthy for the population. But I was away at school for some of this, but I did continue going home for holidays. I used to work in the farmlands. The farmers, a lot of them had gone off to the war, and the farm hands had gone off to the war, but they still needed to produce the food and so forth from the farms. So the government instituted something called the Women's Land Army. And ladies who lived normally in the cities and weren't familiar with the farms could volunteer to go and work on the farms, which was a big help. And then some of them, they could go live on the farms. But so I used to go out and help as I was able to. And one day I was out, they had just harvested a wheat field, and the harvester tied up the wheat in bundles that we called shocks, and they were laying on the ground, and you had to go along and take 3 or 4 of these shocks, stand them up one against the other so that they could dry out. If you left them laying on the ground, they'd mildew and the wheat wouldn't be any good. Anyway, I'd been doing that all afternoon, and we had an anti-aircraft gun right across the street from our house, and we got to know the crew pretty well. And I was coming back from working in the fields, and one of them calls across and says, "Mike, what you been doing?" And me, in my innocence, said, "I've been shocking up with the land girls." That's what we used to call it, shocking up. You took the shocks and you stood them up. So for any time after that, as I stuck my nose out of the house, there would be, "How are you and the land girls getting along, Mike?" But the Germans moved up onto the coast, some large artillery guns. As I said, it's 21 miles across. And they would use the artillery guns to shoot at convoys going up through the channel, or they would shoot across the channel into Folkestone or Dover. And it was, as I say, 21 miles across. These guns, though they weren't pinpoint accurate, I'll show you some maps if you're interested, they did do a lot of damage to the harbor in Folkestone. And that shelling went on until September of 1944. It started in August of 40 and went on till September of 44, shooting across the channel at us. The last shell struck our school building, as a matter of fact, and took out the headmaster's study and the library. Luckily, we were still in Wales, and though my dad had been working in the building a few hours before the shell landed, he had gone home. On a clear day, I could see the coast of France from my bedroom window, 21 miles across. Quite clearly see the coast of France. At nighttime, I would open up my blackout curtains without my light on inside, and I could lay there, and when the gun fired over on the French coast, I could see the flash. So I knew that there was a shell on its way across. So I'd call out to my parents and say, "There's one coming over." And we would lay there and wait and wait. It's amazing how long it takes a shell to come 21 miles. And pretty soon we'd hear it explode somewhere, maybe up in Dover or maybe down in the harbor. We never knew. But then, when we heard the explosion, we knew we were safe. Then, to add a little spice to life, on June the 13th, the Germans opened a new offensive against England, and I was home for summer holidays, and it began with a new German weapon, became known as flying bombs. You want to? That's one of the guns and the German guns on the French coast shooting across at us. Next picture, please. And that's my school after the shell hit. It took out this headmaster's study down on the lower level and the library up above. So you can see the damage that it did. Anyway, the Germans opened this new offensive. Next picture, please. This was the V1 bombs, or the British called them doodlebugs, because they kind of doodled across the sky. They looked like small airplanes. There was no man in them. They flew automatically. They were fired from France. Their purpose was to try to destroy London, and also it had very successfully terrorized the London population. They traveled at about a speed of 400 miles an hour, and there were only a couple of airplanes that could actually fly up and catch them and shoot them down. So some of the British pilots developed a little trick where if they could fly up beside it and get their wing under the wing of this flying bomb and just tip it, it would throw the gyros that controlled the airplane, the bomb, and it could tip it and it would crash. So that was kind of daring, but it worked. The British put anti-aircraft guns all along the coast to shoot these things down, and a lot of them still got through to London and caused a lot of damage in London. They came over mainly during the daylight, and strangely enough, usually at lunchtime or breakfast time. They had a payload of 1,870 pounds of high explosive, and enough of them got through to London to cause panic, and tens of thousands of Londoners left the city once again. Needless to say, we had a few close-up and personal encounters with the doodlebugs. Our house received damage when one of them exploded right over the house, and the concussion of the explosion took out most of our recently replaced windows. They exploded just as Mother and I were to sit down and have our lunch, and when we went in to look, the lunch table was covered with the ceiling. That was the one that dumped the soot all over my grandmother. The flying bomb attacks continued until the invading Allies came up the French coast and captured the launching sites, but not before approximately 6,000 Londoners and many along the south coast had been killed. They actually, with the end of the shelling from the French coast and the capture of the V1 launching sites, southeast England became relatively quiet. There were a few lightning raids. They actually sent 9,600 9,651 of those things were launched from France into England. And then a new thing came along, as if that we hadn't had enough trouble, the advent of the V-2 rockets. These were real rockets that were sent straight up into the atmosphere and then in an arc over into London. Had serious psychological effects on the population. Regular bombers we could see and we could hear. The V-2 doodlebugs we could see and we could hear. But the V-2s just dropped out of the sky right into the city. And they carried about a ton of high explosives, and they did tremendous damage, and they killed a lot of people. Fortunately, there weren't an awful lot of them that actually got through to London. I got a stat here somewhere. Yeah, they launched 1,300 of those things against London, but only 517 got through, but they killed 2,750 people. This new assault on London began September 1944, and the last one was launched March of 1945. As the war progressed across Europe and things began to relax, finally in December 44 it was decided that my school could return from Wales and establish itself in its own buildings in Folkestone. We actually occupied the school again in January of 45, and classes began slowly until we could get the building properly operational. I had stayed, as I said, 4 years in Wales, just going home on holidays to be with my parents. Every attempt was made to return to pre-war classes and schedules. In the summer of 45, we have reestablished our relationship with the University of London, and we sat our matriculation exams, and I was successful and qualified to matriculate at the University of London. We had mixed feelings about leaving our friends in Wales. Strong friendships had been established to the point where one boy actually returned to Wales and married his Welsh girlfriend. And it couldn't have been a shotgun wedding, folks, because the police had picked up all the shotguns when the war started. All my years in Wales had been happy ones. It was hard to be away from home, but the way the Welsh people had accepted us, and I had become a part of the Lewis family. Lewis, we have a Lewis here, don't we? But and he was Welsh too. Anyway, I'm still in touch with members of the family. In fact, I was over there last December, and one of them traveled all the way from Wales down to London to spend the day with me. So strong friendships and relationships were established. But the time had come for us to move on again. What had happened to my 3 older brothers? Well, the oldest one I told had gone back to the States right away. He didn't like it there in England. But he joined the American Army, and guess what? Yes, they sent him back to England. And he went into France on D-Day +6 for the invasion at Normandy. And he managed twice, I don't know how he did it, but twice he managed to get leave, and he left France, came and stayed with us in England for a weekend of leave. Twice he did that. And then he went back to the States when his unit went back. So he was back in America. The next oldest brother joined the RAF, and he served in the Middle East as a radio operator. And towards the end of the war, he wangled a transfer to the U.S. Army Air Corps in Italy. I have no idea how he did that. He was born a Canadian, of English parents, naturalized American, took the oath of allegiance to the king to join the RAF. Nobody knew what his nationality was. I'm not fooling. When he got back to the States, he had to be renaturalized. Anyway, he found out when he got back he had tuberculosis, and he spent 2 years in the sanitarium. The other brother, next in age to me, when the American forces came over, he joined the 8th Air Force, worked in the headquarters, flew some missions, and he was awarded the Bronze Star, and he returned with them to the States. So all three of my brothers got back home safe and sound before my mother and I did. My father was in contact with the American Embassy in London. Next picture.
Is this the one you're looking for?
What's that?
Oh, that's a V2 rocket. I'm sorry, I missed a picture, didn't I? Sorry.
Okay, I'll go to the next one.
Yeah, go to the next one. Well, that's where the V2 rocket landed in London. You see the devastation one of those rockets could make was tremendous. You see the row of houses in the back there are all heavily damaged. The V2s, they came straight down. You didn't know they were coming, just all of a sudden, wham, there they were. Okay, next one. Okay, the American Embassy in London arranged transportation for all of the Americans who had been stranded in various places in Europe, and sent the MS Gripsholm, a Swedish liner, around Europe to pick us up. And it brought us back to the United States. Of course, again, that meant we had to sell our property, sell our furnishings, and so on and so forth. And the beauty of it was, after you sold everything and put the money in the bank, there was no way you were going to get it out of England. You were not allowed to transfer money out of England. So we went back. I think we each had 40 pounds in our pocket, and that was it. Luckily, my three brothers were back in the States, and they'd all had received their demob money, and they were flush. So they were able to take care of us. Anyway, we got back to, we sailed from Southampton, March the 2nd, 1946, arrived on March the 12th in New York. Next picture, please. We had been gone for 7.5 years, and the Statue of Liberty looked pretty good, believe me, as we sailed into New York Harbor. Next picture, please. That's the first picture of a whole family taken after we all finally got together for the first time after the war. We had been separated, as I said, 7.5 years. My dad, my mother, my oldest brother Bill, the next brother Barney, brother Malcolm, and the good-looking one again on the end there. Yeah. The one in the middle, the tall one, he was still in Army uniform because he was still in the Army hospital recovering from tuberculosis. But that's the story of my life in England. Wow. I've got some pictures up, some maps up here if you'd like to see the actual damage that was done around the coast where I was living.